All right, folks, you have survived, and this is going to be the last set of our lab videos. And what we're going to cover tonight is the muscular system and a few things. You will be able to take out all of the cat musculature. We are not going to do any cat musculature for the lab test, just because obviously you guys can't be in lab as usual. So it's really not fair to you to have you learn the cat musculature when you actually can't see and get up close and personal to the cats right now. So all we are going to focus on in this unit then for lab is the human musculature. And we're going to start on page 38 of your checklist, and we are going to extend all the way through page 44. And we will explain, page 43 and 44 talks about origins, insertions, and actions of muscles. And we'll give you a little bit more detail as the lecture progresses on that. So here we go on our magical tour of the muscular system. We're going to first start off with this histology. And we have covered these already in this class. We covered these in the tissue section for lecture. We have our three types of muscle tissue. Again, is cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and skeletal muscle. So if we just start going right down in the checklist of skeletal muscle, again, APR has great pictures of skeletal muscle. But again, the big thing that we want you to realize for skeletal muscle, that it is striated. Again, it looks striped. There are lines running through it. And again, just like we mentioned in the tissue video, is that this is all due to the arrangement of certain proteins that are found in the muscle. Also, too, one other thing that we want you to know about the appearance is that it's multinucleated. So if we look, we can see there are just three nuclei right here that is part of this cell right here. And again, the reason being why skeletal muscle is multinucleated is because the length of the muscles, they are extremely long cells. And what ends up happening is if we only had one nucleus, the one nucleus would not be able to coordinate the activities of the entire cell. So what happens is there are multiple nuclei put in place, and they are all coordinated together to make sure that the skeletal muscle cell functions as one complete unit. And again, the location of this muscle. This is the muscle that is found attached to bones. So again, if we just look at our torso model, this all right here is skeletal muscle. The dex muscle, then that you're, and then the type of control is voluntary. If I do not actively move my arm to get this movement, skeletal muscle is not going to do anything. So we have to actively move it so that the muscle is under voluntary control, and the division of the nervous system that controls it will be the sympathetic nervous system. Then moving on to cardiac muscle. Again, cardiac muscle, is slightly striated. There are striations, but they're not as dense as they are in skeletal muscle. And again, it's all due to the arrangement of proteins in the muscle. But there's one important structure that will help you identify cardiac muscle all the time, and that is the intercalated discs. Intercalated discs are found at the junctions between cells, and what it does is it allows for the continuation of electrical activity to move from one cell to the next. So we could look at the intercalated disc very similarly to the gap junctions that hold epithelial cells together, that allow for the movement of molecules and from cell to cell. The intercalated discs are very similar to gap junctions that allow the movement of electrical activity from cell to cell. So if we come right up on this picture right here, this dark line right here, that is the intercalated disc right here. And then if we come over here, we can see another intercalated disc right here. So they show up as very dark lines. And that is one of the big keys to understanding cardiac muscle. Another thing that we want to look at too is cardiac muscle is branched, whereas skeletal muscle is not branched. Cardiac muscle is branched. So, and again, there's a single cell per nucleus. And then for the location quite simply is the heart. If you find cardiac muscle anywhere in the body other than the heart, that tells you that your heart has pretty much exploded, and that's not a good thing for us. Okay, and then the division of the division of the nervous system that controls it. This will be the parasympathetic nervous system. And then last but not least is smooth muscle. Now, smooth muscle, the first thing that we need to know is smooth muscle contains no striations. Okay, so smooth muscle contains no striations. There is a single cell, there's a single cell with a single nucleus. And a lot of times the nucleus and the cell, or the cell shape, is a spindle shape. And again, there's a great picture of that on APR. Just make sure you use the higher magnification when you're looking at the APR picture, and you'll see the spindle shaped muscle, the muscle cells of smooth muscle. But again, the big key is there is no striations running through smooth muscle. The location of smooth muscle is in the walls of hollow organs. So you could say in your blood vessels, in your respiratory passageways, the organs of our digestive system, which in food and liquid pass through, all contain smooth muscle. The urinary bladder, the ureters, the urethra, those are all structures that are hollow, and they all contain smooth muscle. Again, smooth muscle, like cardiac muscle, is under involuntary control. We cannot speed up or slow down our heart rate if we want to. We cannot speed up or slow down the rate in which food moves through our digestive system. We cannot speed up or slow down the rate that air is moving through our respiratory system. It's all due to the effects of smooth muscle. And then finally, what division of the nervous system controls smooth muscle? That will be, again, the parasympathetic nervous system is what's controlling smooth muscle. So here we go. Now we're going to actually start identifying and looking at the muscles. We're not going to worry about the tissues anymore, but now what we're going to do is start identifying the muscles. And you're going to notice when you go through your checklist, you're going to go through your checklist and you're going to notice that there's some muscles there that have stars by them. Those are the muscles that we want you to know origin, insertion, and action on. And real quick, brief tutorial. This is more what we want you guys to study. And what we're going to look for, though, when we talk about origin, that is the muscle, just make the note, it's the muscle's attachment to a relatively stationary bone. And then the insertion is the muscle's attachment to a movable bone. And so when we just look at it, like for example, our biceps brachii muscle, which is right here in the anterior arm, the origin is up on the scapula, and the insertion is on the radius here in the forearm. So what ends up happening is when this muscle contracts to produce movement, and again, our biceps brachii, when it contracts, it produces elbow flexion. But if we look, we can see that the scapula is not moving at all, but what bone is moving now? It's the radius. Now, we're not going to have you know origin and insertion for every muscle. There's only 12 of them that you are responsible for. But for our purposes right now, the insertion always will move towards the origin when the muscle contracts. And then the action, quite simply, is what does the muscle do? Okay? So in the case of the biceps brachii muscle, one of the actions that the muscle produces is elbow flexion, and then also supination or pronation. Oh, supination. That was my bad. I'm jumping ahead. I'm thinking of something else. So again, one more time, elbow flexion for an action of the biceps brachii, and also supination. So when we bring our hands, if our hands are in pronation down here, and you contract our biceps brachii muscle, what ends up happening are the palms of the hand then start to face anterior, and that is due to the actions of the biceps brachii muscle. And you're also going to notice when you're going down origin, insertion, action, there might be 5 actions listed for the muscles. Mr. Fogel and I are only going to have you required to know 2. And what 2 do you need to know? Whatever's the easiest 2 for you are. Same thing with origins of the muscles. And for the most part, the insertions are from 1 to 2 bones, but if there are more than 2 insertions, we only want you to know 2. That's the most we're ever going to ask you on a question. So again, pick the easiest 2 that you can remember the easiest, and that's what you go with. So origin, insertion, and action, you're responsible for those for the 12 muscles that are started. All right, what we're gonna start with are the back muscles. And yes, models are fair games, pictures of models are fair game on the test, and also again, APR pictures. So again, please be looking at your APR. It's a real beneficial tool for you guys to look at and to study at home. So the first muscle is the trapezius muscle. Now the trapezius muscle is a superficial muscle that we see on the back, and it's in the shape of a trapezoid. Now what you're gonna notice on this side, here's the trapezius on the right hand side, but on the left hand side, it's missing, because why it's missing on the left hand side here is to expose the deeper muscles. And you'll notice that in a lot of even in your books, in other pictures that you look at, we can't show you the deeper muscles if we don't remove some of the superficial muscles. So that's what you're going to be seeing right here, folks. So again, so imagine the trapezius muscle running here out to the scapula, down here, back up here, and then back up into our neck. So it's one big trapezoid figure right here. So that is the trapezius. And yes, that's an origin and insertion and action muscle that you need to know. The next one then is latissimus dorsi. That's another superficial back muscle. And here is latissimus dorsi right here. So again, the trapezius is more superior. The latissimus dorsi is more inferior. And so again, the latissimus dorsi, again, on this side, it has been removed. So we are going to come up right through here. And that's latissimus dorsi. Next one is levator scapula. So it already tells you, and yes, latissimus dorsi is another origin and insertion and action muscle. Same thing with our next muscle, which is the levator scapula. Levator scapula is this muscle here. It is found deep to the trapezius, and it is found here. But it already tells, if you just say the name levator scapula, it already tells you one of the bones that it attaches to. And yes, here is the scapula right out here, and here is levator scapula. What that muscle is going to do, when you shrug your shoulders and your scapula move upward, that one of the muscles that is contracting is levator scapula, to get the scapula to elevate. It's right all there in the name, folks. And then the next 2 muscles are the rhomboid major and minor. And the rhomboid major and minor, again, found deep to the trapezius. And where they run between the scapula and the vertebra. And here they are right here. So this is what happens when the scapula move closer together. Basically, when you pinch your shoulders together. Rhomboid minor is superior and is smaller. Rhomboid major is larger and inferior. So rhomboid minor, rhomboid major runs between scapula and the vertebra, deep to the trapezius. And then last but not least is the sacrospinalis, or the erector spinae muscle. I learned it as erector spinae muscle. It helped me remember it, because what does this muscle do? What is it responsible for? It's responsible for keeping the spine erect, to help us keep it upright. Now, these muscles are deep. They are very deep. In fact, a lot of them run along our vertebral column. So we're not really going to see a full picture of them on our models here. But what we can see some of the erector spinae muscles running right here. And the note is the muscle fibers run vertically. Muscle fibers run vertically right here. Now, again, APR has a great picture. See, we're just showing you this little bit right here, but in essence, this is the whole erector spinae muscle group. You can see how extensive it is and how much of the back it does cover. So that is your back muscles. Okay, so now what we're going to move into is the muscles of our arm. And again, the first one that you need to know is the deltoid. And the deltoid is this large muscle right here that sits right on top of the shoulder. Okay, so the deltoid is sitting right here and it crosses over. So there's deltoid. If we take our little He-Man, we can see our deltoid muscle sitting right through there. Okay, so that is the deltoid muscle, and yes, that's another origin and insertion and action muscle. So deltoid. Now now on this arm model right here, which we have, here is the deltoid right here. So again, if you look, that's the arm, and then here is the deltoid muscle. The next muscles now are the rotator cuff muscles. There are 4 muscles that make up our rotator cuff, and I'm sure that we've all heard of that muscle group. We may not know the muscles, but we've heard of the muscle group. What the rotator cuff muscles are responsible for are helping to stabilize the humeral head inside the glenoid cavity. And without a rotator cuff that's functioning properly, what can happen is we can have a lot of shoulder dysfunction. So, and again, these muscles are found deeper to our deltoid. So when we look at this model right here, again, if we come back here, our deltoid would be sitting here, but now the deltoid has been removed, but what we can see is we can see more of our scapula right here. And what we have are the rotator cuff muscles are the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and teres major. And where we're going to find them at, they're all found right here around our scapula. Oh, not, you know what, so now what we're going to look at are the rotator cuff muscles. And the rotator cuff muscles are found deep to our deltoid, and they surround our scapula. And the whole function of our rotator cuff, and we've probably heard that term before, rotator cuff. But the function of a rotator cuff is to help stabilize the humeral head inside the glenoid cavity of the scapula. That gives our shoulder a lot of stability. And once someone's rotator cuff becomes damaged, people lose shoulder stability and lose shoulder functioning really quick. Now, the 4 muscles that make up the rotator cuff are the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and the subscapularis. And where we find those muscles at, we find them right around the scapula. So again, the first muscle, and one of the best landmarks that we use to help to identify these muscles is this part of the scapula right there, the scapular spine. So there's scapular spine. So now if we just move above it, or we move proximally, there is the supraspinatus. We move inferiorly, here is the infraspinatus, and then running right alongside on the inferior border of the infraspinatus, we have this muscle running right here, which is the teres minor. Now the 4th rotator cuff muscle is the subscapularis, and that's going to be found on the anterior surface of the scapula. These are found on the posterior surface of the scapula, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Subscapularis is found on the anterior surface of the scapula. So if we come back to our arm model right here, again, this is the deltoid. We're going to take the deltoid off. I'm going to put that there. And then what we can see here now, we got the scapula exposed. We can see scapular spine. Now we're going to come into the supraspinatus right here. We're going to come into the infraspinatus, which is just distal to the scapular spine. We can see this small muscle running right along the inferior border of the infraspinatus, and that is the teres minor. Now what we're going to do is we're going to rotate the scapula to where we're looking at the anterior surface. And now that is the subscapularis. Again, another way to look at this, where does the subscapularis sit? It sits between the ribs and the scapula. Talk about, since we're in this neighborhood, is the teres major, excuse me. Teres major is not part of the rotator cuff muscles, but where we find it at, we find it just distal to teres minor. So we have, here is teres major right here. Here's teres minor right here. So again, just move distal to the teres minor and you will run right into teres major. And to finish it up, the two remaining muscles are again origin, insertion, and action muscles as well. The biceps brachii, again, which is right here on the anterior surface of the arm, right here. And then we come to the triceps brachii, which is on the posterior part of the posterior side of the arm. All right, we're moving into chest muscles now. And the first chest muscle that you are responsible for is the pectoralis major. So pectoralis major is this large muscle right here that covers the thoracic region. So that is pectoralis major. Okay, so all right through here is pectoralis major. It's your chest muscle. Now the next muscle is the pectoralis minor, and pectoralis minor is found just deep to pectoralis major. So again, if we were to remove pectoralis major from this, there is a small muscle remaining underneath of that, just deep to that, and that small muscle right there is the pectoralis minor. Serratus anterior, it's always not the easiest to see, but serratus anterior attaches to our scapula, and then it basically runs just through the axillary region, and then what it does is then the muscle then splits, and it splits to where it attaches to the ribs individually. So again, here is serratus anterior in here, and on this model right here, you can really see it. You can really see the divisions between the muscle groups that are coming out and attaching to the ribs. What this muscle does is this muscle is one of the muscles that we use as an accessory muscle when we're trying to get more air in. What it does by attaching to the ribs, when that muscle contracts, that pulls the rib cage further apart front to back to allow for further expansion of our lungs. And no, I'm sorry, you don't need to know that for the test. Sometimes this is how a little bit of information you can just keep on building off of it. But again, serratus anterior right here, running through the axillary region, from the scapula out to the ribs. The next one are the intercostal muscles. The intercostal muscles are found between the ribs. We have the external intercostals, which are superficial, and the internal intercostals, which are deep. Now, here are the external intercostals running right here. The muscle fibers run down and in. And folks, if you just stand up and put your hands into your pockets, if the direction that your hands are moving into your pockets, that is the direction of the muscle fibers of the external intercostals. And then just deep to them, muscle fibers you can see right here running down and away, not down and in, but down and away. Those are the internal intercostals. And again, these are internal intercostals right here, internal intercostals right here. And I always say it's kind of, other than muscle fiber type, it's kind of hard to distinguish the two, especially if you got enough barbecue sauce on them. You can't taste the difference between the external or the internal intercostals. But remember, muscle fibers of the external intercostals, which are superficial muscles, run down and in, much like the direction that you're putting your hands into your pockets. And then the internal intercostals, the muscle fibers will run down and away. And the internal intercostals are deep. Okay, now what we are going to move into is your head and neck muscles. So the first muscle that we need to know is the sternocleidomastoid. And this is this large muscle that is right out here on the lateral side of our cervical region. So if we come up onto this model right here, here is the sternocleidomastoid right here. And yes, it's an origin and insertion and action question, but when you spell the name out or just break it down, it tells you every bone that it's attached to. Sterno, the sternum, cleido refers to clavicle, and mastoid is referring to the mastoid process of the temporal bone. And so that tells you and a lot of these muscles have the names of the bones that they're attaching to in them. So it's sternocleidomastoid right here. Again, yes, another origin, insertion, and action question. So then as we keep moving down, the sternohyoid now. Sternohyoid is a muscle that runs pretty much right on the midline of our neck. And what it runs, and if we break the name down, sterno, running from the sternum to the hyoid bone. Sternum to the hyoid bone. So we're gonna find it right approximately in our neck, right in through here. So obviously on this model right here, we have got it removed. Now on this model though, we can see a little bit of it right in here. But I'm just trying to get you to understand locations of that. So right here, so there's our larynx right here, and the larynx runs just deep to our sternohyoid. Now we do have a nice model right here that illustrates the sternohyoid very nicely, and there are two of them. And again, if they were together, if we would slightly separate them, what would we expose? The larynx and the trachea. So right there, those are the sternohyoid muscles. Okay, right there. The next one is the masseter. Again, another origin and insertion and action muscle. The masseter is found in our cheek. This is the muscle that is responsible for elevating our mandible. So basically it helps close our mouth, so it helps us chew our food. So here is the masseter right here in our cheek. Very nice and easy to see without question, masseter. The next two muscles, the orbicularis oculi and the orbicularis oris. These are circular bands of muscle that surround the eye and the mouth. So orbicularis oculi, it tells you right where to find it, folks, right around the eye. And here it is right here. Orbicularis oculi, that circular band of muscle. This is the muscle that closes our eye. So when that muscle contracts, the eyes close. And then the orbicularis oris is this circular band of muscle right here, right around the mouth. So that is the muscle that helps you pucker up when you want to give someone a kiss. Okay? So orbicularis oris, orbicularis oculi. The next muscle is the platysma. The platysma is the most superficial muscle in our neck, but it is paper thin. But what it does is it would line and cover, it runs from the mandible out to our clavicle, and it basically forms a thin sheet over the muscles and other structures that are running in our neck. We can't really illustrate it on the models, but your APR has a wonderful picture here. So right here, this is platysma. So it is quite a large muscle, but again, this muscle is very, like paper thin. But what it does is it serves as purpose as to help keep all the other structures keeps the other structures in place in our neck. So this is platysma. And yes, I promise you, if this question is asked, this will come from an APR picture. Not that that's a big hint. The next two muscles now, the digastric muscles and the mylohyoid. Where we can see these at, we can see these underneath our mandible, underneath our chin, so to speak. And what we're going to do, and what the digastric muscles do, the digastric muscles run outward like this, almost form a V, the digastric muscles, and then just deeper, or just superficial, or deep to that, the mylohyoid would be running. So the digastrics run like this, and then the mylohyoid cuts across the bottom of our oral cavity. So these muscles help form some of the muscles on the floor of our mouth. And one of the better places that we can show you again is on He-Man right here. So when we come into here, if we look, you can see this muscle right here, that muscle right there. Those are the digastrics right there. And then the muscle running right in between it, that is the mylohyoid. So digastrics running along the body of the mandible, and then the mylohyoid, which is just deep to the digastric muscles. Also there is an APR picture. Which we can never find right away. Oh, but here it is right here. So the digastric, there are two heads to the muscle. That's hence the name. So when we look at it on the APR picture, we can see that is the part that's running along the body of the mandible. But then there's another branch, another division of the muscle that comes up and attaches out by the ear. So again, this is the digastric muscle. Mr. Fogel and I are kind of big on the digastric muscle underneath the chin, and that's what we will more stick to. But we do want you to be aware of that the muscle just doesn't run along the body of the mandible. It does come up by the ear and attaches. And then finally, finishing up with the muscles of the head and the head and neck, we have the temporalis, frontalis, and occipitalis muscle. These are straightforward, folks. If you know your regions by now, you're going to know where the frontalis muscle is. And again, here's the frontalis muscle right on the forehead. The occipitalis muscle, yes, you guessed it before I could even turn the head. Here it is right here. The occipitalis muscle is on the posterior side of the head. And then temporalis muscle, you guessed it. The temporalis muscle is on the lateral side of the head. So one more time. Frontalis, occipitalis, temporalis. And then there is a band of connective tissue that holds the frontalis and the occipitalis together. And it's this white tissue right here that runs across the top of our head. And that specific name of this connective tissue right here, that is the galea aponeurotica. So we have the frontalis, we have the occipitalis, and this band of connective tissue that connects the two is the galea aponeurotica. Okay, now we are moving on to our forearm muscles. And yes, sometimes you look at the names and it scares everybody, but if you just start saying them and practicing them, these muscles are not that bad to learn. And then there's a certain order that they follow, and in fact, they follow right through the checklist. So if you can get the pattern down, this is going to be very easy for you. So what we are looking at, again, here's the arm. So what we're going to be looking at right here, here's the forearm, and this is the muscles that we're going to look at. So the first muscle list is brachioradialis. And again, if you just listen to the name, it tells you everywhere where it's running. It's running from the brachial region all along to the radial side of our forearm. So this muscle right here, this here is our brachioradialis muscle. Okay, brachioradialis muscle. Now what we are on the anterior surface of the forearm. Okay, so what we're doing on anterior surface of the forearm, so what you're gonna notice, some of the muscles have the word flexor in them. And again, that's where we contain the muscles that flex our wrist and our fingers are found in the anterior compartment of our forearm. So this is it right here. Now, again, as we start going, and we're gonna go right in order. So here's the brachioradialis. The next muscle that comes up is this muscle that runs at an angle. And this is the pronator teres. Yes, the function of the pronator teres is to pronate the forearm. But if we notice that this muscle comes here and runs at an angle, but we look at all these other muscles and they're coming down into basically down into the palm of our hand or the wrist. Pronator teres is the only muscle that does not extend down into the wrist or fingers on the muscles that you need to know. And then we move over the next muscle as we keep moving across the forearm. The next muscle then will be the flexor carpi radialis. And if you follow that down, we will see that the muscle inserts then right at the base of our thumb. Again, this is the radial side here, folks. So there's the name, flexor carpi radialis. We come over to this muscle right here. This will be the palmaris longus. Now again, if you just stop palmaris, it's going to the palm. So let's trace it down. And we see it attach right into the palm of our hand. And then the last muscle, we just rotate the forearm just slightly right here. This muscle right here, this will be flexor carpi ulnaris. It attaches to the ulnar side of the wrist. So let's just do that in succession one more time. Your starting point always will be brachioradialis. If you find brachioradialis, you can find all of these forearm muscles just off of brachioradialis and never have an issue with it. So we got brachioradialis, pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, and then finally flexor carpi ulnaris. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move to the extensor muscles, or the posterior side of the forearm. So again, right here, this is the flexor component of our forearm. We come to the posterior side. This is the extensor side of that contains the extensor muscles. And here they are right here. Now the first thing is, again, we always want to find brachioradialis. So here we go. Here is our brachioradialis right here. Now, as we go down the checklist, the next muscle in line is extensor carpi radialis longus. Extensor carpi radialis longus, which means relatively short, small muscle body, long tendon. And then we also have the next muscle in line is the extensor carpi radialis brevis, which means long, bigger muscle, shorter tendon. And where we can see these at, they are right next to brachioradialis. So we have brachioradialis. We come just around a little bit more. Here is our extensor carpi radialis longus. And then there is extensor carpi radialis brevis. The next muscle then would be your extensor digitorum. And this does something really nice for us that really makes it easy. Here is extensor digitorum, extensor digitorum, right here, extensor digitorum. We follow it down, we pick up the tendons, and we see the tendons then split, and the tendons then go out to the fingers or to the digits. So that's a very easy way to identify extensor digitorum. And then as we just rotate the forearm just a little bit more for you to see, this last muscle then, extensor carpi ulnaris. And then guess what? You have all the forearm muscles done.
All right, let's move on down in our checklist to page 41. Now at the very top of the heading says diaphragm sitting all by itself. As it says there, it's internal skeletal muscle forming the floor of the thoracic cavity. So the best way for us to see this muscle is to just show it to you first and foremost. And right there, that's what the diaphragm is going to look like. Again, you can see the striations, diaphragm. But if we pull the chest plate off, what we're going to see is the diaphragm separating our thoracic cavity from our abdominal cavity. So if we can find the liver, there's one muscle that sits here alone, and there is the diaphragm. We do need you to know that, whether it is shown in the actual torso or if we just give you the muscle all alone by itself. There's our great example, diaphragm. Now, abdominal muscles are really straightforward as well. So we can just go ahead and set the chest plate down on the table. And just like before, we have able to see more superficial muscles. So we saw the pectoralis major versus the more deep muscles like the pectoralis minor here. So superficial side, deep side of our chest plate. Okay. The first one on your checklist says external oblique. So external, we're going to find then the outside, you might say, of the lateral abdomen. So right where I'm placing my hand, just inferior to where we'd see pectoralis major, we're going to find this strap-like muscle across. And just like how we had the external intercostals running, the external intercostals here, right, running down and in, right through here, lighter pink hue. That's the same direction that we're seeing the external oblique muscles running, down and in, down and in. So most superficial seen. Rectus abdominis is going to be seen right down our midline. So this is that 6 or 8 pack, or sometimes that 6 or 8 pack is covered by a half barrel, we like to say. Well, in this case, with everything removed, we can see the entire 8 pack here, right, of rectus abdominis in this case. So rectus abdominis, and the name's built right into it, helps us stand more erect. Segueing into internal oblique, right? Since we had seen external oblique here running down and in, we can remove, so we can now expose internal oblique muscles seen here. And just like how we had our internal intercostals, we see the fibers running down and out. We see that same similar direction of the internal oblique muscles running down and out, down and out, down and out, internal oblique. To see the transverse abdominis, we're going to take this chest plate and we're going to flip it over, because these are deep. These are deep to external and internal oblique muscles. And we're going to see these lining the abdominal cavity just outside, right, of the abdominal cavity. Transverse abdominis. Transverse. We see these running on a horizontal plane with the fibers across. So transverse abdominis, backtrack, internal oblique, external oblique, rectus abdominis. And we see one midline here, and this is called our linea alba. It's a fibrous tissue that runs vertically from the xiphoid process of the sternum all the way down to the pubic symphysis. Let's move into the hip, thigh, and lower leg muscles. To start this off, we're going to start up in the hip. And we're going to be looking at 2 muscles in particular, the psoas major as well as the iliacus. Now, in order to look at these 2 muscles, we're going to be finding this iliac crest here of the ilium, and we're going to be moving medially. And these muscles are going to be found deep. So on this model, for instance, we're not going to be able to see any of those muscles. We're going to have to pull everything apart in order to see these 2 deeper muscles. Now, in order to find each one, we start here. Iliacus. Iliacus is the most lateral muscle. We see this directly adhering to the most medial, deep portion of the ilium, hence the name iliacus. And sitting right next to it, associated more with the lumbar spine through here, we can see psoas major. So the P silent, psoas major, runs from the spine down towards the thigh, deep, and then just lateral to it, iliacus. Sartorius is the next muscle that we're going to look at here. And I'm going to come on down to our He-Man model, because he has very well exposed thigh muscles. Now, if we look at the thigh in general, okay, we can see 1, 2, 3 key muscles starting here at that same point, the anterior superior iliac spine of the ilium. So we begin here. This is essentially what we might say as our origin versus where these muscles come down to, where they would insert down towards. The first one on your checklist associated with number 3 is called sartorius. Sartorius is an S-shaped muscle that wraps around the inner thigh from the outer portion. So if we originate at the ASIS, we're going to see the sartorius wrapping down, shooting down, long thin muscle towards the inner thigh to the medial knee. Let me show you on the opposite side, very well exposed again from the ASIS. Sartorius runs downward, shoots downward towards the medial knee as well. Show you that on our larger model on a grand scale. There we go. Sartorius. Let's give that a spin. You can see that. Insert medial knee. Tensor fascia lata. It sounds like a coffee drink you might order at Starbucks in the drive-thru, right? Well, I wish. But you might want to go get a cup of coffee now just to get through this rest of the lecture. Where we had found the sartorius originating, we're going to also find the tensor fascia lata. Tensor fascia lata is going to run from that ASIS, but now it's going to run down laterally. Where we saw sartorius run medially, it's going to shoot laterally instead and be a very short, minute muscle overall. And what we're going to see is that tensor fascia lata is going to run into this white band of tissue, this long white band of tissue that runs along the entire lateral thigh. And we want to know this as letter D on your checklist. The iliotibial band, or if you want to short and abbreviate it, IT band is fine for us. It's fascia associated with this muscle, right, found along the lateral hip and thigh. So if you find tensor fascia lata, you follow it down, you're going to run straight into the iliotibial band right here, this white connective tissue. Just a short reference to you on the large leg model. You can see both those structures too very well. Tensor fascia lata and iliotibial band. Gluteus maximus, if you get this one wrong, you are in big trouble. Let's go ahead and flip He-Man around. Woo! There's America's ass. Sorry, I had to do it. It's the one curse word you're going to hear on this. But I think we all know this by now. Gluteus maximus, the most superficial rear end model or muscle of this model. To show you that on just this single leg and hip model, right? Gluteus maximus, largest, most superficial hip muscle, butt muscle, you might want to call it. Gluteus maximus. Gluteus medius, on the other hand, is going to be seen just medial. So where we find gluteus maximus, we simply move superiorly and medially, and we're going to find gluteus medius. We can take away gluteus maximus to expose that a little bit better. Excellent. Gluteus medius. Piriformis is the next muscle that we're going to see since we've removed the gluteus maximus. And we're not going to see that in He-Man muscle, right? Because we can't remove his butt cheeks. But we can go ahead and look here. And since we removed the gluteus maximus, we can see gluteus medius still through here. But we're going to go down to this muscle right through here. And where we had that greater sciatic notch of the ilium, we're going to see one muscle running through here, the piriformis. Now sometimes what's known as piriformis syndrome happens is when we get pressure on this nerve, the sciatic nerve. We get pain, tingling, inability to move our leg if that nerve is pinched through there. Go see a physical therapist if you're getting that going on. It might help you fix that ailment. Quadriceps. I'll go back to He-Man here, because he can get up close and personal. Well, quadriceps are the first one of your quadricep muscles is actually one that's on your checklist for a origin insertion action muscle. Okay, so make sure you do know those. But again, we always start at the origin and work our way to the insertion. For your purposes right now, rectus femoris is one of 4 quadricep muscles, and these are all associated with extension of the knee as well as hip flexion. But we're going to see this as the most medial anterior thigh muscle, rectus femoris. Now, if we look to either side, we will see vastus medialis and vastus lateralis. So if you know your directional terms, you should be cooking no problem here. Rectus femoris, if we move just medial, we have vastus medialis. You'll see it on this model here, this side. Rectus femoris, vastus medialis. If we give us a little turn here, the most lateral muscle of the quadriceps, vastus lateralis. So again, rectus femoris, vastus medialis, vastus lateralis. Google bodybuilder. His name is Kai Green. You will see the most insane looking vastus medialis and vastus lateralis ever on a human being. In his bodybuilding days, you can see these actual striations of the musculature on this person. Pretty insane. So cool little thing to see. Moving on to the last muscle of the quadricep group is called vastus intermedius. Intermedius mainly because it is deep. It's going to be found deep to rectus femoris. So in order for us to see that, we're going to pull away couple here. Sartorius is gone. We're going to take tensor fascia lata. We're going to pull that off there too, and we're going to take rectus femoris. We're going to remove that as well to expose a deep muscle between vastus medialis and vastus lateralis. Right here in white, a lot of white, right? White shine here to the muscle, all right? This muscle is adhering to the femur, and this is called vastus intermedius. So all through here, just deep to rectus femoris. To give you one more little viewpoint of that, all right? We got rectus femoris right through here, but we go deep, and now we can see vastus intermedius as well. Let's move on to the inner thigh. So we'll start with our landmark muscle, our sartorius muscle. All right, let's go ahead and turn the thigh. So we got the internal thigh here, all right? So the groin per se. Now let's find a landmark muscle. I know I'm skipping 9 and 10 here for a second on page 41, but we're gonna go to number 11 on page 42, and that's the gracilis muscle. This is an important landmark because it runs just posterior in reference to sartorius. We run here and we can find gracilis. Gracilis is the thickest, longest medial thigh muscle. All the way through there. Still running to the medial knee. Gracilis. Now the gracilis is going to help us find those last two, number 9 and number 10 on our checklist. Okay, so let's give it a little turn here. The first one was adductor longus. The big thing for us to know is here is just like we were seeing before, when the longus is in the name, it's relatively short muscle, relatively long tendon. So in this case, so we find gracilis, we move anteriorly, and we will find adductor longus right through here. So you might say that sartorius and gracilis, in between them, we will see adductor longus. Now if we move slightly posterior to gracilis, we'll find this more broad muscle through here. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is adductor magnus. It has more magnitude, more thickness, more broadness to this entire medial thigh muscle. So one more time all in a row. We have gracilis, we have adductor longus, and we have adductor magnus. The hamstring group. It's a good little 3 put together hamstring group. And this is going to reference to the posterior thigh, okay? If we look below gluteus maximus, we will see all these muscles here along the posterior thigh. The first one on your checklist is semitendinosus. Well, the easiest way to find semitendinosus is to find also semimembranosus at the same time. And that's going to be these two muscles sitting here on the posterior, more medial aspect of the back of the thigh, versus this other muscle that sits more laterally and can be seen here, all right, of the hamstring group. So let's go to the first one, semitendinosus. My finger is sitting right on top of semitendinosus right through here. Semitendinosus, I like to say, sits on top of semimembranosus. So if you follow semitendinosus down here, we can follow its tendon, and there it goes ahead and inserts into the medial knee. But if we look right here, just medially, just anteriorly, we can see semimembranosus. Semimembranosus has more magnitude, it's thicker, but it's also going to be deep to semitendinosus. So semimembranosus is here, but we can also see if we give it a little turn, there we go, there's a little bit more of the semimembranosus. So that's where its thickness comes into play. All of this portion right through here is semimembranosus, but semitendinosus is going to be sitting on top of semimembranosus. Semimembranosus is always slightly found deep to semitendinosus. And then biceps femoris. Yes, we had biceps brachii earlier on with the upper arm, but now since we're in the leg, we have to call this biceps femoris. Make sure you do it on the test. That's very important. Otherwise, you might be naming the wrong muscle for us. And this is our more lateral posterior thigh muscle, responsible for knee flexion, right? But if we look here, biceps femoris. Biceps femoris. Moving on down to the lower leg. We'll start with the first one on our checklist, tibialis anterior. So the name really tells it to you right there. Tibialis runs along the tibia. Anterior, the anterior portion of the tibia, or the lower leg. So we can find the tibia here, right? And this here is still a left foot. If we find the tibia, we're just going to move slightly lateral. And we can see one muscle that runs along the entire anterior portion of the tibia, hence the name tibialis anterior. So you can find this muscle on yourself sometime. Take your leg and pull your toe up, find your shin. You'll feel one thick muscle running along your leg, tibialis anterior. Extensor digitorum longus. Now we had found extensor digitorum in the forearm. When we're talking about the leg, now we have to add the word longus onto it. So we have extensor digitorum longus, and we're just going to keep kind of writing a roadmap like we did with the forearm. We had tibialis anterior, or our landmark muscle, so to speak, for now. Simply, if we just rotate laterally one more muscle, we can find extensor digitorum longus. So we follow this downward, we follow it down, find the tendon, and as it runs downward, we all of a sudden see this muscle split with all of the tendons to all the toes. Hence the name extensor digitorum longus, because it's in the lower leg. Extensor digitorum longus. It's the only muscle that runs to all the toes. Rotating around a little bit more, we can find another couple muscles here. Fibularis or peroneus longus, and then fibularis or peroneus brevis. I like to go with fibularis because it kind of tells you right there, right? It runs along the fibula, the most lateral portion of the leg. So we're just going to go in conjunction. We had tibialis anterior, we have extensor digitorum longus. The next muscle that we're going to see, the most thick and superficial muscle, is going to be fibularis longus, and that's signified with a very relatively long tendon here, fibularis longus. If we move slightly anterior to it, so we could say in between fibularis longus and in between extensor digitorum longus, we will find peroneus fibularis brevis. And again, a brief tendon, short. So in unison, in conjunction I should say, starting here, fibularis longus, fibularis brevis, extensor digitorum longus, and back to our good old landmark, tibialis anterior. Let's move to the posterior portion. Okay, so sural region, lower leg, calf region, you can also say. We're going to see a couple key features here, and we're going to start with our landmark muscle, our star muscle, gastrocnemius. So make sure you do check that out. It's one of our 12, the last of our 12 that you need to know: origin, insertion, action. This is probably one of the most important muscles that we can have for our entire lifetime, because this is going to provide us with a combination of some knee flexion as well as plantar flexion, so we can constantly cause locomotion, walking, right? That's one of the most important things we can ever do for the rest of our life, is be able to walk and not have to wheel around. And I attribute to this muscle right here, the gastrocnemius. Very, very important muscle. So we can see the gastrocnemius has two very large heads right there. Gastrocnemius along the posterior lower leg. And if we come down, we see this white thin band of tissue. All right, and we follow the muscle tendon down, and it attaches here to the heel. Well, what we're looking at here is the calcaneal or Achilles tendon. It's this little portion right here that attaches from the combination of the soleus, gastrocnemius, all the way down to the calcaneus, the heel bone. And without this, it cannot serve as an attachment site to allow us to cause walking action. So very pivotal portion. This is one of the worst injuries you could ever have, Achilles tendon tear. You will not be able to walk, guaranteed. Okay, so we can see how those two separate from the rest of the entire leg. Holding at the calcaneal or Achilles tendon, we can run upward. And again, more superficially, we can see gastrocnemius. But if we look just deep to gastrocnemius, we can see one muscle that sits right here. And this is called soleus, the deeper muscle associated with the lower leg. Again, we can see soleus all through here then as well. Soleus. Now we have one last muscle, and we will call it quits for today, all right? And this muscle is called flexor digitorum longus. Let's go ahead and look at the most inner portion of our lower leg. We had found gastrocnemius, we had found soleus, we had found that calcaneal tendon. Well, we see one lonely little muscle here adhering to the most medial portion of the tibia, and we see that muscle wrap down, shoot down, and wrap underneath the foot. So it's going to allow our foot to create some pull, per se. This is where we get flexor digitorum longus. Again, longus because we're in the lower leg, but now we're trying to flex our toes. We're trying to flex our toes, right? Or cause flexion. So we have flexor. What's it do? It flexes the digits, flexor digitorum longus. And those are all of your leg, hip, and thigh muscles putting together with all the rest of the muscles that Mr. Kestner and I had taught you. So make sure you review this video. Check out your APR pictures. They are going to help you wonders on this last final test. Great chance to score well. We hope you've had a really fun time, one fun semester. Give us some feedback. We love to hear what you got. Thank you.